controversy surrounds Homeland Security and whether or not to provide humanitarian relief for what's going on in the border. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, up to the thing, and the Democrats by law are supposed to pass a budget. They failed to do that and haven't even tried, which is pretty sad. So, Budget Control Act passed in the mid '70s and went into effect in 1976. Yet again, this is the 17th year in a row that the United States government has passed a budget, and the Democrats seem completely unconcerned about it. They have passed a series of appropriation bills. We'll be voting on one of those today. And the biggest problem, there's a lot of problems with what they passed, is that they exceed the spending caps, which so there was a try to rein in spending in this country, and they just blew through it by the tune for almost $150 billion, which is way out of line with what they know they're supposed to be doing. And so they're really, unfortunately, very much show bills that they're sending over to the Senate. So they're kind of sending them a pile of garbage that they know has no chance. It legally can't become law given where we are in the legislative process. So, certainly I and a lot of my colleagues were wondering, are the Democrats really here to govern?
Yeah.
Not passing a budget, they're not passing realistic spending bills. And I think, what we debated, put out of the House yesterday, had to deal with border security. And I spent 2 hours on the floor listening to that debate and being generally pretty repulsed by what I heard.
Wow.
The Democrats, whereas, we've talked about this. There are basically three things that you can do or should do. You need to build the physical barriers, keep people from coming over illegally. You need to have a processing system to rapidly process people who are coming in, to adjudicate their claims of asylum rapidly, and also to change our laws. Congress made a mistake a couple of years back saying that if you're coming from a country other than Mexico or Canada, when you claim asylum, you can stay in this country until we adjudicate your claim. What that means now is you have people coming from the Northern Triangle countries, so El Salvador, Honduras. They're showing up at the border and they're asking for asylum. They're giving a work permit and a court date in 5 years. And furthermore, if they show up with a child or pretending to be a family unit, they're released from custody within 20 days. And so you're watching cartels literally renting children to get across the border and to get into this country more quickly with a work permit. And you're seeing, huge numbers of those people never show up for their trial. And then the ones that do show up, most of those are actually thrown out as fraudulent. So you have a series of laws that are broken. So you can either fix the laws, put in the barriers, or create a process. And what we saw yesterday in the Democratic Appropriations Bill, they actually were reducing the number of beds. They were actually making it harder. They refused to pay for overtime for Border Patrol. So our Border Patrol is stretched to the limit. They've had huge increases in the number of people crossing illegally. And so a very simple idea, hey, let's pay overtime to those public servants that are actually working to defend us. They're on the border. They're risking their lives. The Democrats flat refused to pay for overtime for Border Patrol. It was a really, really shocking level of just, we're not going to govern.
Well, it's just amazing.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
And I'll just make this comment. Usually in a crisis, people step up and they do what's right, and they buckle down and they address the crisis head on. And I saw that, working on the Ebola crisis a couple of years back in Collin County. I saw that with Harvey. I've seen that over and over again in the legislative process in Texas. Here in Washington, we unquestionably have a crisis on the southern border. The Democrats spent months saying there is no crisis, you're lying, you're making it up, this is fabricated as a fraud, the strongest words possible. Now they're saying there is a crisis and it's your fault, but then they actually are refusing to do anything about it and are actually passing legislation to make it worse. And unfortunately, it's with intention. They're intentionally making it worse, and it just boggles the mind. I go back to the original question, are the Democrats really ready to govern? And from what I've seen so far, they're not.
Well, again, one of the things that the president has said as well is you can fix this with dealing with some of the loopholes related to amnesty and a variety of other topics. And also, you can deal with some issues, and I'd be willing to even postpone the ICE deportations. But what I hear from you, Representative Van Taylor, is after 2 weeks come and go, nothing will have changed in terms of any kind of change in the law or the, if you will, closing the loopholes dealing with the issue of amnesty.
No, and as far as the ICE raids, I mean, these are people that have received final orders for deportation. Their claim for asylum has been denied. It's determined they do not deserve asylum. They need to be deported immediately. And you have, once again, you have Democrats saying that this is xenophobic, racist. This is irresponsible. Look, if you don't want to deport people who have been ordered on a final deportation order after it's been adjudicated in court that they have to be deported, who are you going to deport? I mean, are you going to govern at all? This situation, again, in the legislature in Texas, I saw Republicans and Democrats come together over and over again to work through problems, to try to solve things, wherever they may be. And, here in Washington, I just see a lack of desire to actually govern, to really handle what's unquestionably a crisis. And, I mean, I guess the good news is the Democrats are now saying there's a crisis, but instead of saying it's a fake crisis, they're now saying this is a Trump crisis.
Yeah.
And so it's just kind of – but either way, they're not willing to help. And, I mean, the fake crisis, we're not going to help. This is a Trump crisis, we're not going to help.
We'll take a break and continue our conversation for a few more minutes with Representative Van Taylor. Talk about some of the legislation he's working on right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Dennis Prager asks parents an important question. He wants to know, did your child return from college a better person? I think many of us sadly know the answer to that haunting question. When I first joined Probe Ministries, they had a brochure with the title, Will Your Children Lose Their Faith in College? His question attempts to dig even deeper into the current college environment. For example, he looks at the percentage of college students who are drinking on campus. One website states that roughly 80% of college students, 4 out of 5, consume alcohol to some degree. It's estimated that 50% of those students engage in binge drinking. Another example would be sexual promiscuity on campus. Dennis Prager observes, we're all aware of the sexual activity that emanates from college drinking and can be regretted the next day, usually by women. And I might add that the latest estimates are that 1 in 4 college students will contract an STD during their time in school. A third concern is depression and mental illness. One writer in Psychology Today concludes that it is neither an exaggeration nor is it alarmist to claim that there is a mental health crisis facing America's college students. Evidence suggests that this group has greater levels of stress and psychopathology than any other time in the nation's history. So that is why parents need to understand the dangers and begin to evaluate where their children attend college. They need to stop and realize that they might be sending their kids off to a school that will increase their chances of depression, increase their likelihood of binge drinking, and return home with a head full of secular, progressive ideas about marriage, family, and society. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Socialism, go to viewpoints.info/socialism. That's viewpoints.info/socialism.
You're listening to Point of View. your listener-supported source for truth.
Representative Van Taylor with us for a few more minutes. And I might just mention that one of the things we're going to talk to him about is the whole idea of medical billing. And that is actually something we were going to get to tomorrow because Penna Dexter has written a piece called Exploiting Medical Professionals. Friday, we have Dr. Merrill Matthews in studio, and he's written a piece about healthcare price transparency. And even more recently, there has been a great column out by Stephen Moore, who said that he went to the doctor. There was a small tear in his rotator cuff, and so he asked the doctor, if I have this surgery, how much will it cost? The doctor looked totally confused and said, Steve, I've been doing these surgeries for 20 years, and you are the first patient to ever ask me what it costs, and then said, I really don't know what it costs. Well, that gets us down to a piece of legislation, Van Taylor, that you've been working on. It's called the Protecting People from Surprise Medical Bills Act. And so even though we were going to spend some time tomorrow talking about it, and we'll probably talk about it when you're not with us, since you are with us right now, tell us about that bill.
Sure. So, as you know, I have a 100% meeting policy, and I've actually had, as a member of Congress, the number of people that want to meet with me has gone up a little bit. So I'm almost at 250 meetings in my first 6 months as a member of Congress.
Wow.
And, one of the things that has come up many times, it comes up a lot, is just the cost of health care, but specifically people who have insurance, and they have good insurance, and they go to a place to get a procedure, and they ask, what is am I covered? It's absolutely, this is a covered facility, and then they get a surprise bill. They get a bill from a radiologist or an anesthesiologist, some other consulting specialty who was out of network. And that bill sometimes is absolutely extraordinary. Yes. And that's an incredibly frustrating for people. And I've talked to people who literally are on the verge of bankruptcy as a result of a surprise medical bill. They did everything they could to avoid, and they tried not to have it happen. They tried to make sure that they were covered and in network, and they find out that they are actually in big trouble. So something that we've been working on this in Texas for the last several sessions. Actually, just recently, my good friend Kelly Hancock, a state senator from Tarrant County, passed a piece of legislation that basically sets up a standard price, and then in the event that there's a disagreement, it goes to what's called a baseball arbitration, where the arbitrator has to pick one of the two numbers. You can't pick in between. So if somebody says it's $100, the other person says it's $200, the arbitrator picks 100 or 200, not 150. And so that incentivizes people to give a very realistic number that's close to the accurate number so that they actually are going to win that arbitration. This model was actually implemented 5 years ago in New York State. And look, if you find a good model that works, you want to emulate it, and that actually eliminated surprise billing. It actually took the consumer out of it and made it between the provider and the insurance company. And it actually resulted in very few surprise bills going to arbitration. So you'd think that the ones that went to arbitration were pretty reasonable. And actually, that model is liked very much. Providers, insurance companies, patients, everybody kind of likes that model. And the reason we need it in Texas, the reason we need federal legislation, is that half of America is insured by employer-based insurance underneath a law called ERISA, and the ERISA law was written by the federal government in the 70s. And so the surprise billing work that my friend Kelly Hancock did in the Texas Senate this last session protects everybody on a state insurance plan, but it doesn't protect anybody on an ERISA plan. So basically, he saw the problem for 10 or 15% of the population, but half of Americans still have a surprise billing problem because there's not an ERISA solution. So this provides an ERISA solution. But the good news is it's very congruent with the Texas solution. So you have a consistent policy answer for Texans. So I'm very happy that was to get in early on that. And we actually just filed this literally an hour ago. I've been working on it for several months here with Republicans and Democrats. So I think we've got a bipartisan agreement on it on this particular piece of legislation. The White House has said they really want to address this. They've been not as specific. But in terms of what I'm thinking, this seems to answer the mail in terms of getting something done, solving a real problem, and answering one of the key questions I get back home, which is what can you do to try to address the cost of health care and how to lower it. So very excited about this. I think this is a positive step forward, and certainly look forward to working with my colleagues here in the U.S. House. Republican and Democrat, to really solve the problem.
And I might just mention that we're going to later in the week talk about how to prevent some of this on the front end through price transparency, but this is how to deal with it on the back end. And again, coming out of the state of New York back in 2015, and back to a point you've made so many times, Van Taylor, I was just counting up some of the individuals that have actually been a co-sponsor of this. At least 4 of them are Democrats, including Donna Shalala, who would be certainly familiar to some of our listeners. And this is the kind of thing you used to be able to do in the Texas House and the Texas Senate. It tends to be kind of the exception right now in Congress. So you deserve high marks for gathering together a number of individuals on both sides of the aisle to address a very important issue.
Yeah, no, I think, again, this is an important issue. Surprise billing, when you have 100% meeting policy, you hear from your constituents and you hear what's important to them. And the people I work for, this has been a consistent complaint for a number of years. And again, we've addressed it at the state level. I think we have I think we've adopted a good solution, in Texas. But again, about half of Americans are just not addressed because the federal insurance that they have is just not covered. So this is gonna cover that, and I'm really proud to stand up for this and to look again, reach across the aisle. And, where I can, I absolutely reach across the aisle. As you know, in the Texas legislature, I passed 81 bills. Everyone had bipartisan support. And actually, a majority of the legislation I signed on to here, actually, I think like 90+% of the legislation I signed on to here in Congress is actually bipartisan legislation. So I try to work to create solutions and solve problems. And this I'm very proud to be an original co-sponsor on this, and really try to get a good head of steam and make sure that we solve this problem for the people back home.
By the way, if you'd like to know more, again, we have a link to vantaylor.house.gov. Just before I let you go, though, we have a Democratic debate tonight, a Democratic debate tomorrow night, 20 different candidates over 2 nights. Sure. Are you planning on watching the debates?
I'm not, actually. Tonight is the congressional baseball game.
Priorities. That's right.
It's a game for charity. So we fill National Stadium with tens of thousands of people, if you can believe that, and all the money goes to charity. So it's something that is fun to do, and it's especially exciting because we have 2 new freshmen, Republican freshmen, who we think are going to be game changers. And one is Greg Stubbe, who was an all-state baseball player in high school, and we have Anthony Gonzalez, who is an NFL football player.
Right.
And Anthony Gonzalez said, I've done more practices for this one game than I did in my entire NFL preseason in the 5 seasons I played in the NFL. So it's going to be an exciting game, and I think we're about to see the Republicans are about to step it up with Greg Stubbe from Florida. So excited to go watch the game and to raise money for charity.
Very good. Van Taylor, thank you for being with us. Look forward to the next opportunity. Let's, if we can, real quickly, just before we take a break, remind you that we are right in the midst of the final week of our fiscal year end, and here's what some of our listeners had to say.
Point of view has been a big tool in helping me work through what I believe and understand why I believe it, and giving me the ability to argue for it and to defend it.
I am increasingly dismayed at not only the slanted coverage that mainstream media provides, but the lack of coverage. If I hadn't listened to Point of View, I know people who don't even know there's a difference between embryonic stem cells and adult stem cells, and I wouldn't have known if I had not listened to your show. And I give it to you guys, but I'm going to increase that amount because I think you guys are so important.
I want you to think, what would we do if we didn't have Point of View? Give something to Point of View to make sure we don't lose this wonderful voice. And thanks again for what you do.
To protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
I do appreciate Point of View and what you folks are doing. You really are doing a great job to educate and to help Christian folks do a better job to honor Christ in all that we do.
You know, before we go to the break, let me just remind you that we only have 3 days left in our fiscal year end. And of course, we're thankful for those of you that have responded. And I'll give you kind of an update when we go to our national broadcast. But I can tell you right now that I know we haven't heard from quite a number of you. And if you've been listening to this program for any length of time, even maybe some of you are listening on this station for only a few months, you know what we do and why we try to cover so many important issues. So I would encourage you to right now go to the website, pointofview.net. We have a banner there which says for you to give now. We encourage you to do so, and we'll be back with more right after this.
How many times have politicians promised to defund Planned Parenthood? Vote for us, we'll do it, and nothing happens. Well, the current administration finally did something, and though it was temporarily blocked, last Thursday a 3-judge panel of the Ninth Circuit recognized the president's power, and around $60 million of our money was removed from Planned Parenthood. It was a ray of sunshine in what's becoming an increasingly tough fight. And with your help, Point of View Radio will be here to continue the winning. But that's the key phrase, with your help. Our fiscal year ends this week, and to make plans for the second half of 2019 and the first part of the 2020 election year, we need your investment right now. Go to pointofview.net, click on the banner saying Morning in America, or call 800-347-5151. And your gift will be doubled if you give right now, thanks to a special matching grant. Pointofview.net, click on Morning in America, or invest by phone, 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Well, Representative Van Taylor said he's not going to be watching the debates tonight because priorities, he's going to go to the congressional baseball game. Don't you know there will be some interest in that as well, because when individuals in the House were practicing for a year ago. Was it a year ago? I guess it was, for that baseball game. That's when an individual came onto the field and shot at some of those individuals. So this will be an opportunity to remind people about that as well. But I suspect many of you will be watching, or if not, at least listening to the analysis that we're going to try to give on Thursday and Friday. Penna Dexter will be with me tomorrow. We'll talk about what was said and what wasn't said. We'll try to play some clips. Lowell Ponte will be with me in about an hour as we talk about the Democratic debates. And as I mentioned just a few minutes ago, about a half an hour from now, Hunter Baker will be with us. Written a very good piece, Can Christians Change the World After Obergefell? 4 years ago, of course, you had this very important Supreme Court case dealing with the issue of same-sex marriage and essentially legalizing it nationwide. And so we'll talk about where we go from here. This debate tonight will have a few people that you would know. Certainly Elizabeth Warren, probably the best known person. Number two, maybe Cory Booker, and maybe also number two, Beto O'Rourke. But once you head down the list, some of these other people might not be as well known. I would imagine you could show a picture of Jay Inslee to many people outside of this studio, and they could not tell you who that individual is, or Tim Ryan, or Amy Klobuchar. Maybe they would know Bill de Blasio simply because, you know, he's been in New York, and maybe some that live in the state of Texas could tell you Julian Castro. But anyway, it will be interesting. So in some respects, one of the most notable individuals, Elizabeth Warren, will be in with a lot of lesser-known individuals. And this was not intended. It was simply random. And so the random situation, I think, benefits some of the top-tier candidates tomorrow night, and that will be Joe Biden, Pete Buttigieg, Kamala Harris, and Bernie Sanders, to mention a few of those that will be tomorrow night. But again, if you're not familiar, won't spend a lot of time on this. The rules will be for each candidate has 60 seconds to answer questions, and then sometimes 30 seconds for a follow-up. There's no opening statements, but they will have some closing remarks. The 2-hour debate each night will be divided into 5 segments, divided by commercial breaks. And the hosts are Savannah Guthrie, Lester Holt, Chuck Todd, Rachel Maddow, and Jose Diaz-Balart. And so that's kind of where we are. And some of the candidates right now kind of trying out their 60-second answers. And that's kind of what a lot of people are talking about right now, because it's 60 seconds for an answer, a television audience in the millions, and an opportunity for the American people, if they tune in, to see these various Democrat hopefuls who range widely in terms of age, gender or sex, background. You've got a former vice president, 6 women, a pair of mayors, and others. For some, it is a coming out party. For others, it's to really solidify their views and those kinds of things. Senator Elizabeth Warren's task, they say, is to harness the recent momentum surrounding her campaign to prove to voters that she has what it takes to defeat Trump. That comes from an article in the Associated Press. And so one challenge for Elizabeth Warren is stylistic. Look for her to try to champion her progressive ideas and then fend off attacks from lesser-known candidates, which you're certainly going to see tonight there in Florida. Again, there are some other somewhat familiar faces. I mentioned Cory Booker and Beto O'Rourke. Beto O'Rourke really hoping that he can re-energize his campaign, or you will not be hearing from him anytime soon. And then you have those names that I mentioned just a minute ago. John Delaney, former member of the House from Maryland, trying to, if nothing else, make enough of an impression so that you would even want to learn more about him in the future. Or you also have Representative Tim Ryan from Ohio. He's on the House Appropriations Committee, but again, doesn't really connect with a lot of those individuals, and so that will be the case. And so the key is going to be for these individuals to see if they can come out with some kind of breakout, some kind of zinger, or whether they actually break out badly. And my best example of that would be Energy Secretary Rick Perry, at the time was the former Texas governor, in that particular debate, actually was asked what he would do. And he said, well, I would get rid of 3 government agencies. And here's the direct quote: Commerce, Education, and what's the third one out there? Ron Paul at the time said EPA. And finally he said, oops. That was an oops that ended that campaign very quickly. So that will be the case. Let me say the obvious, because it's going to come up. This picture that is making its rounds around the internet and is being shown by almost every Democrat, and probably will even be put on the screen tonight, of this migrant father and his 23-year-old daughter face down in the Rio Grande after drowning, is certainly one of those things that I suspect will surface tonight as well. And just as an illustration that even though I think there are some listeners and viewers that are going to be looking for substance, how much substance can you communicate in 60 seconds? So some of it is going to be more stylistic, and certainly if you want to try to make an impression, an emotional impression is going to be key. So that's going to be the strong arguments made against how evil Donald Trump is, arguments that we have a crisis in the border. Of course, you heard Van Taylor point out that for months nobody called it a crisis. Now all of a sudden it became a crisis because that seemed like a better way to actually argue the case. And then how, in some respects, some of these lesser-known candidates will come after not only Donald Trump, but Joe Biden, Elizabeth Warren, maybe Bernie Sanders. And since Elizabeth Warren will be on the stage, you know a couple of times she's going to be asking the moderators whether she can respond to that erroneous particular piece of information that was said about her. So it should be interesting to watch. And even though, as we said, there will be a number of other people that will be looking for something else to watch, nevertheless, NBC and MSNBC have a bit of a coup. I don't know, and maybe somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't know if we've ever had a presidential debate this early, but also a presidential debate that has involved so many who all are on the same stage. I mean, there was a sense in which 4 years ago when you started seeing the Republican debates, and remember, really, those go down to maybe August, you had kind of the big table and then the kids' table. And here, anybody can say anything about anyone. And it's going to be interesting. I've never seen anyone quite like it. And so there's going to be, I think, some great opportunities for some of these candidates to actually begin to make their mark. And then for other candidates to have to throw in the towel and say, this is it. One thing I did mention yesterday, and I'll come back to some more of this later on as we talk about the debates, this piece by Jim Garrity yesterday was really good because he said many of these presidential candidates really want to fundamentally redefine what it is to be an American. And that is when you have Bernie Sanders saying we want to have free college education, and if anybody shows up in the United States, they should be able to go to one of these public colleges. That's very different. When you have Bernie Sanders and Beto O'Rourke saying we want to get rid of the citizenship exam and not even necessarily require that they be able to read and write and speak good English, that's a very different kind of idea. And then you have 10 candidates, including some that we will hear from tonight, like Cory Booker and Julian Castro and Elizabeth Warren, as well as some we'll hear from tomorrow night, like Pete Buttigieg, as well as Bernie Sanders, who believe that once you cross the border or enter the country without permission, that should no longer be considered a crime, which means ICE wouldn't have quite as much to do to deport individuals. And then you have a very significant number, both on Wednesday night and Thursday night, that have also said that the federal government should not require the use of what's called E-Verify. That's where you actually check the status of various people that you might be hiring as a private employer. So this whole question of immigration is going to surface. There will no doubt be questions about what is happening in Iran. Certainly, there will be some questions about abortion rights, yet I can't see one individual on this stage, either tonight or tomorrow night, that doesn't believe in a complete so-called reproductive freedom, which means abortion up to birth and who knows what even after birth. So that could be a question that certainly gets everybody pumping their fists in the air if they're indeed Democratic voters, but it isn't one that really separates out some of those individuals. And I do expect some of these moderators to try to say, well, you've been a mayor, how does that prepare you to be a governor? Or you've been a senator, but you've never done this in terms of the Senate. And those will be some, I think, logical questions that will be asked as well. Anyway, I'm going to take a break, and when we come back, another article we've posted here comes from the Supreme Court and Justice Neil Gorsuch. I'll explain all of that right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. Let me just mention that one of the articles we've posted here is called Congress and the Constitutional Order, written by David French. Why is it every time I turn around, one of the best articles I can find is by David French? Anyway, it is definitely the case, and he entitles it, as he writes for National Review, Justice Gorsuch Wages War for the Constitutional Order. And he says, you know, really, if you were to pick the top 5 reasons for why we have such a politicized political situation, and even the collapse of commerce, collapse really, I say, of confidence, I guess probably be a better way to say it, for the people that don't trust Congress, don't trust the presidency, or just don't trust government. He says, you'd kind of come up with all sorts of ideas, the Iraq War, the recession, policies on trade, health, whatever. And he would say certainly all of the things that he lists, and I'll jump past that, would matter. But he said, let me suggest an unappreciated factor that belongs in the top 5. And it is something that when I found this article, I sent it to Kelly Shackelford because I want to make sure he agreed with what I thought, and he agreed. So I thought, okay. When Kelly Shackelford, a lawyer, says this is something that's really good about Neil Gorsuch, I think it is as well, because he says, really, one of the reasons we've lost so much confidence is because he says, quote, Congress, the branch of government closest to the people, has slowly but surely abdicated its role in American constitutional government, even as the power of the federal government grew. He goes on to say that the American people are increasingly divorced from an increasingly powerful national government. You think? Of course. He said, here's the plain truth. If you live in a safe red or blue state, you may never in your entire life cast a single meaningful vote to influence the 2 most powerful instruments of modern governance, the presidency and the judiciary. You're left with casting votes for the unintentionally weakest branch, the legislature, that seems to want to do anything but the job the founders gave it. If you don't think so, just remember what you heard earlier this hour from Representative Van Taylor. If you've been listening to his program any length of time, you can kind of see his level of optimism that we might get something done in Congress fading dramatically because of this. And the reason that David French brings this up is there was a case the other day where he actually wrote a very significant opinion, and that was a case that had to do with prison sentences for people that were actually committing crimes of violence. Now, Justice Gorsuch, on a number of occasions, has basically, in a nice way, although he's getting much more pointed, basically say, Congress, you're supposed to write laws that are not vague. You're supposed to define terms. And when you don't do your job, don't expect us to fix it. That's kind of the bottom line here. But here is what he actually said in this particular case. I love the line. In our constitutional order, a vague law is no law at all. And he was writing for a 5-justice majority, and the other 4 were liberals, which is another reason why I so appreciate the fact that the framers actually gave the idea of the justices to serve without having to stand for election, because you could see that if he had to stand for re-election as a judge, you could see all sorts of people saying he's soft on crime. No, he's just hard on Congress is the issue here. I really wish some of the other conservative justices had joined him, because what he declared unconstitutional is a statute that threatens long prison sentences on individuals who use firearms when committing crimes. But the whole issue is it's all based upon this idea of crimes of violence. And he says basically the problem with the language is, quote, it provides no reliable way to determine which offenses qualify as crimes of violence. And so this is a good example of where Congress just sort of waves its hand and say, we need this bill, but they don't write it with any precision. Have you just heard Representative Van Taylor tell you that just a minute ago? And so as a result, they just hope that Congress, even though it doesn't do its job, will pass the buck on to the court, and the court will do the job that Congress should do. And Neil Gorsuch will have none of it. And in a previous one, interestingly enough, this was Gundy versus United States. He joined with, in this case, some conservatives, Justice Clarence Thomas, John Roberts, and others, sending again a signal to the court that the court was not maybe ready to resuscitate something called the non-delegation doctrine. It gets into some kind of inside the baseball kind of arguments, but it's, again, an attempt to really get Congress to delegate its authority to the courts. And, of course, in some cases, it isn't the court that's expected to fix it. It's the bureaucracy. And if you don't want a better example than this, maybe you've got a better one than I've got, but the best one is the Affordable Care Act. Because Louis Gohmert will be with us tomorrow. And Louis Gohmert is one of the few members of Congress who I know at the time actually read the Obamacare law, Affordable Care Act. And I took the time to read sections of it myself. I didn't have the patience to read all of it, and a lot of it doesn't make sense because it refers to some federal statute. Unless you got the federal statute there, you don't even know what it's referring to. But time and time again in the law, it simply said, as the Secretary of Health and Human Services shall determine. So nothing was really determined in this very long, thick law, 2,000 pages plus. But when in doubt, we'll just let the Secretary of Health and Human Services determine it, or we'll let one of the bureaucrats determine it. And that's unfortunately how too many pieces of legislation are being written today, where nobody really does their work. They simply delegate it to someone else. We wouldn't allow a student to do that, to say, well, I haven't researched all this, but here's a footnote to Wikipedia that fills in that gap, and here's a footnote to something else, and here's the paper, and it's only 3 pages long, and all you have to do is find all the links, and then your paper is done. Nope, that's not what we do in various areas of education, and it's certainly not what we should do in Congress. So anyway, I posted this article because one of the heroes lately of some of the conservatives is Justice Gorsuch, who is simply just impatient and losing his perspective a little bit, and certainly his patience with the Congress that isn't doing its job. And so time and time again, he's saying, do your job. That's what you're supposed to do. That's a return to the congressional order that we supposed to have and the constitutional order that we're supposed to have. But just before we take a break, let me mention one more time that we encourage you to support this ministry, and let's hear from some of our listeners that are encouraging you to do the same.
I really appreciate what you guys do. I love the program, and it's so refreshing to have this type of ministry on the air. And, you know, you pray that others would tune in and really get educated from a spiritual perspective about a biblical worldview. I mean, I really appreciate it.
You guys do an amazing job. You guys always are very encouraging, and no matter what, I just wanted to thank you guys.
I just wanted to commend you for the excellent guests that you've had on your program. I think all Americans need to hear these things, and I hear you say that only 1% of listeners support your program, and I just want to encourage people out there. They need to support your program because our country needs to hear these messages.
I just want to say that I love your show. I listen to it every day because I get off just in time enough to hear it, and just keep up the good work.
Just wanted to know how much I appreciate your program. I've been listening to it for several years, and thank you so much for the positions you take. Keep up the good work.
You probably heard that one individual remind us that only about 1% of the listeners actually respond. And this month, we've had a couple hundred listeners either earlier in the month or even during this week to respond. But we certainly have a very significant financial need, and we would like to end our fiscal year in the black. A little bit later, I'm going to have Warren Kelly even kind of give us an update on what we need. But more importantly, we not only need to finish the fiscal year in the black, we need to be able to make it through the summer. So anything you can do to help us out would be greatly appreciated. You can do so by going to the website, pointofview.net. We'll have more right after this.
How many times have politicians promised to defund Planned Parenthood? Vote for us, we'll do it, and nothing happens. Well, the current administration finally did something, and though it was temporarily blocked, last Thursday a 3-judge panel of the Ninth Circuit recognized the president's power, and around $60 million of our money was removed from Planned Parenthood. It was a ray of sunshine in what's becoming an increasingly tough fight. And with your help, Point of View Radio will be here to continue the winning. But that's the key phrase, with your help. Our fiscal year ends this week, and to make plans for the second half of 2019 and the first part of the 2020 election year, we need your investment right now. Go to pointofview.net, click on the banner saying Morning in America, or call 800-347-5151. And your gift will be doubled if you give right now, thanks to a special matching grant. Pointofview.net, click on Morning in America, or invest by phone, 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. We've got a lot to cover in the next couple of hours, and I might just mention later this hour we're going to focus on this debate tonight. It is the first of two debates, June 26th, June 27th. Tonight, of course, focusing primarily on some of the leaders like Elizabeth Warren and Cory Booker and a few others, Beto O'Rourke, but a lot of maybe no names, people that you may not know, some people that may not be well known by the American people. So there's a possibility for some of them to have a breakout night or simply fade into the background. Thursday night, a number of more well-known individuals are there. Joe Biden, Bernie Sanders, Kamala Harris, Pete Buttigieg, to mention just a few, and again, some no names, or at least some people that we may know about around the table, but not everyone will. So we're going to be spending some time talking about that a little bit later this hour. But one of the things we like to do here at Point of View is also talk about anniversaries. A while back, we just talked about the 75th anniversary of course, D-Day. And, of course, we always focus on the anniversary of Roe v. Wade. Well, of course, 4 years ago, we had the Obergefell decision, which relates to same-sex marriage. And so the article that I've posted here for you to read, Can Christians Change the World After Obergefell? And it is written by Dr. Hunter Baker, who joins us now by phone. He is the Dean of Arts and Sciences and Professor of Political Science at Union University in Jackson, Tennessee. Author of a number of books, The End of Secularism, Political Thought, A Student's Guide, and A System Has a Soul. Was the winner of the 2011 Michael Novak Award, which is conferred by the Acton Institute. He's a research fellow as well with the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission. And this article, which he has written, is on our website, pointofview.net. Dr. Baker, welcome back to Point of View.
Hey, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
I know Penna Dexter had a chance to interview you last time you were on, and I certainly have followed you and appreciate the work that you have. I might just mention this is kind of an excerpt from a Gospel Coalition ebook, Revisiting Faithful Presence to Change the World 5 years later. And, of course, this idea of to change the world gets us into James Davidson Hunter, who's been on the program. As a matter of fact, almost everybody you quote here has been on the program at one time with us or another. Rob Dreyer, Robert George, as well as Gabe Lyons and a number of others. But let's get to the big issue first, because early on you say that some people think, well, yes, this same-sex marriage decision was not a good decision, but you refer to it as maybe the greatest defeat in the nation's history. That would catch a few people off guard. Explain why.
You have to understand, this is a decision I have been waiting for since probably the late 1990s. I was a law student at that time, working on religious liberty issues, and I remember we were pushing the Religious Liberty Protection Act after parts of the Religious Freedom Restoration Act had been struck down, at least as to the states.
Right.
And I remember that they're opposing us, and this I wasn't really ready for this. I was surprised by it, was the Human Rights Campaign, which may still be the largest gay civil rights advocacy organization. And then I suddenly realized that gay Americans see their rights as fundamentally in conflict with rights of religious liberty. And I realized as soon as I figured that out, I thought the day is going to come where the Supreme Court will decide whether or not same-sex marriage is a constitutional right. And if that happens, the effect of that will be massive. Now, most people I know who were kind of involved in that debate, they were busy kind of litigating the merits of gay marriage, yes or no, right? Just sort of that political question.
Right.
But I was worried about something else, and that is slowly coming to fruition. What I realized is that if same-sex marriage became a constitutional right, then that would put the American Constitution, really for the first time, directly at loggerheads with Christian orthodoxy. And as soon as that happened, I realized that the potential implications for higher education, the massive nonprofit sector in the United States, even potentially the church, the implications are absolutely massive. And I think that a few people may have realized that as we see these cases, or wedding cakes or wedding flowers, things like that, people have a little bit more of an inkling. But it's gonna be much bigger than that.
And again, we've had individuals basically say that in almost as many words whenever there is a conflict between LGBT rights and religious liberty. Well, LGBT rights wins. And, of course, this is why we've had Kelly Shackelford on so often of First Liberty and other individuals to simply address some of those issues and look at that in terms of the Supreme Court. But the theme of this is from this book that talks about to change the world. And that takes us back to 5 years ago when James Davidson Hunter wrote a book that probably is quoted more lately by social activists than almost any other, at least in the Christian world, and that is this idea of changing the world. And his argument is that we maybe as Christians misjudged where the influence was. We tend to think that our influence is in numbers, but nevertheless, we should, I guess I'm summarizing him, but I'll see if you agree, should have been engaging those people in some of the cultural centers, New York, Los Angeles, Hollywood, and the news media, and the academy, because that's where the change takes place. And I think a lot of people were shocked that we went from a time in which most people thought marriage was between a man and a woman to a time when now we believe that marriage is two men, two women, or that even the transgender debate just unfolded seemingly overnight. And I think some of that goes back to James Davidson Hunter's analysis, don't you think?
Yeah, the book is really interesting. You have described his thesis about how these changes happen very well. Basically that it's not about the numbers, that if you look at the people who have had the largest impact culturally, they have been small outgroups, such as homosexuals more recently, but also Jews, right? I mean, the number of Jews in the entire world, there are there are maybe 7 billion people in the world right now. There are only about 13 million Jews in the entire world. And if you think about the incredible influence that very small minority of people have had, it's very impressive, right? And so part of what that communicates to you is that it is possible to change culture from a very small base. So then the message is, Christians, you can't just count on whatever numerical advantage you've had, that power changes in a different way.
Let's take a break. We'll continue our conversation with Dr. Hunter Baker right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Dennis Prager asks parents an important question. He He wants to know, did your child return from college a better person? I think many of us sadly know the answer to that haunting question. When I first joined Probe Ministries, they had a brochure with the title, Will Your Children Lose Their Faith in College? His question attempts to dig even deeper into the current college environment. For example, he looks at the percentage of college students who are drinking on campus. One website states that roughly 80% of college students, 4 out of 5, consume alcohol to some degree. It's estimated that 50% of those students engage in binge drinking. Another example would be sexual promiscuity on campus. Dennis Prager observes, we're all aware of the sexual activity that emanates from college drinking and can be regretted the next day, usually by women. And I might add that the latest estimates are that 1 in 4 college students will contract an STD during their time in school. A third concern is depression and mental illness. One writer in Psychology Today concludes that it is neither an exaggeration nor is it alarmist to claim that there is a mental health crisis facing America's college students. Evidence suggests that this group has greater levels of stress and psychopathology than any other time in the nation's history. So that is why parents need to understand the dangers and begin to evaluate where their children attend college. They need to stop and realize that they might be sending their kids off to a school that will increase their chances of depression, increase their likelihood of binge drinking, and return home with a head full of secular, progressive ideas about marriage, family, and society. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Socialism, go to viewpoints.info/socialism. That's viewpoints.info/socialism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, we are privileged to have with us for a little bit longer Dr. Hunter Baker, and have posted his article, which I really encourage you to read, because Dr. Baker, now let's, if we can, talk about later in your article, the 3 approaches, because it is something we've tried to at least give some kind of hearing for. One is kind of the Benedict option, the idea that we'll just focus more on our orthodoxy, maybe not get involved in the culture wars. Another is kind of what you call the Robert George option, best illustrated by when we've had people like Robert George, or even especially more likely Ryan Anderson, who's been on the program with us many times before, to continue to engage that. Or then a little bit like James Davidson Hunter, just say, I just think we need to practice peace, shalom. Explain those for just a minute, because in some respects that lays out the options for us in this kind of post-same-sex marriage world that the Supreme Court has thrown us into.
Sure, and let me say, I think these are probably not mutually exclusive options. Rod Dreher has kind of encouraged Christians to separate to some degree, right? There's a sense in which we cannot raise our children necessarily the way we want to raise them within the mainstream of this culture. That the culture will affect them to an inordinate degree, and they will become excessively worldly in essence. And so it makes sense to separate, to get outside of the mainstream, to try to form intentional communities. It doesn't mean you have to make a commune or something, but to be more and more intentional about the people you live near, about the churches you go to, and to really focus on formation, right? And I have nothing bad to say about that. And I don't think that Rod is talking about, kind of some permanent escape from culture, but merely to recognize that to be in the current culture means that I don't want to use the word contamination, but something like that, right? That the culture may affect you more than you affect the culture. And so that's kind of been the thrust of his thinking. Robert George, Ryan Anderson, and others, they take what I would call kind of an intellectual ammunition approach that no, we stay in it, we engage at the maximum level with the very best arguments that we can marshal, and just continue to engage the debate. I think that's necessary as well. But I think that also we have to acknowledge that the debate is not necessarily a fair one. There's a certain amount of, you might call it intellectual or conceptual gerrymandering. Robert George or Ryan Anderson, for instance, they do try to offer secular arguments against same-sex marriage, and certainly natural law arguments against same-sex marriage, but essentially the arguments they make are ruled out of court by the other side and treated as though they have no substance. But I still think it's important to have that kind of engagement and to maintain that witness. And James Davison Hunter focuses on shalom, which has to do with making sure that we do not just become kind of a tribal influence in American society, that we don't become sort of the Amish of American society, but rather that we are not so separate, but we do sort of reassure people of our goodwill, of our interest in our mutual flourishing, that we not be seen overly antagonistically. I think that most people who are listening can kind of identify that, look, there are parts of all three of these that we essentially must do.
Sure. And one of the things you said later on about some of the things that are put forward by Michael Gerson or James Davison Hunter is that what you see is sometimes people say, well, I'm going to take strong stands on, I love the examples you use, well, wiping out malaria. Well, who's against that? Preventing sex trafficking. Well, is there anybody on the other side of that one? Prevent child abuse. Right on. I mean, and that's been my problem since we do a millennial roundtable. And as a matter of fact, next Tuesday, Dr. Nick Pitts will be here, and he'll be doing his Millennial Roundtable. I'm going to suggest to even talk about some of this there, because sometimes millennials say, oh, I'm culturally involved. I'm against sex trafficking. Well, is there anybody on the other side of that? That's not really taking a real controversial stand. Yeah, it feels like you're doing something, but the battle is on life and marriage and those kinds of topics. And when we say, well, I'll just leave those for the secularist and we'll take on the issues that everybody agrees on, that's better than not doing anything. But I think you've pointed out a really significant issue that it's not exactly leading a faithful witness to a watching world, is it?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, that's part of what drives me crazy about somebody like Michael Gerson is that he'll talk about that, and I'm kind of like, so I understand that the life issue is super divisive, but is there any set of circumstances under which we would feel free to set that burden down? Absolutely not, right? I mean, the sanctity of life is one of the most fundamental areas of concern that a Christian should have, and that Christians have had since the very beginning of the Christian church. It causes bad feelings. People in sort of the Hollywood, D.C., New York nexus can't stand us talking about it. That doesn't mean that we can stop. We absolutely have to do that. And, one of the bones that I would pick with James Davison Hunter is that he acts as though Christians started the culture wars, or as though we were the aggressors in the culture wars.
Not hardly.
And I think that's fundamentally wrong.
Yeah.
It's you have sort of a cultural vanguard that has pushed these issues. Christians have responded to that, but we certainly did not, as Billy Joel put it, start the fire.
Well, first of all, I want to just say that I appreciate your work, and I'm hoping maybe we could get you on with Nick Pitts when we have the kind of millennial roundtable, because that's where a lot of this surfaced. And, of course, we've even had some debates back and forth about whether David French and some of these other individuals' ideas about culture war are appropriate. And so I wanted people to kind of hear from you, especially when we were talking about the anniversary of the same-sex marriage division and decision that came down. But more importantly, even though this came out a while ago, I just thought it was a good piece to put in front of people to kind of get them thinking about it. I'm going to encourage our listeners to read it, and then let's see if we can get you on that program and have a full-blown, robust debate with some of our millennials on that one. So while I'm mentioning that, of course, we always appreciate the good work at Union University. So just before I let you go, let me also mention that if a student is looking at a place to learn, especially in your field, political science from a Christian point of view and others, it would be just a great place to go. And, of course, we have a link to your website and information about some of your books. So I appreciate you being with us today here on Point of View, and this will be the first of hopefully many discussions on this very important aspect of strategy and what we should do as Christians. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, and absolutely, send us your kids. You won't be disappointed.
Again, if you'd like to know a little bit more, again, that's Union University. It's in Jackson, Tennessee. And again, we'll have him on again. Of course, we also have the president there that joins us from time to time as well. We are in the midst of, as you well know, our fiscal year end, and we only have 3 days left before the end of that. And so once again, I want you to consider how you might support this ministry. We've heard from hundreds of you, but there are still tremendous needs financially, and we have quite a hill to climb. So if you have not responded, let me encourage you to do so. And here's another reason why.
To all listeners out there, I've been listening for over 2 years. I just recently became a supporter. So I'm a proud supporter of Point of View, and so I would just encourage everyone who listens to this radio station and to your specific broadcast, because it has been so influential for me, and I refer people to it because you put out such great information, and it's so thought-invoking and conversation-stimulating. It's great. So thank you so much, and I'll continue to support you guys.
But I've decided I'm going to give Point of View something this year because I think financially we're doing better. Point of View is one of, in my opinion, 2 or 3 places where you can really get this kind of information, and it is sorely lacking in our culture. And so Point of View, and there's a couple other programs, if we don't support them, I'm not convinced those messages will get out.
Thank you very much, and I just love your program. It's been an inspiration to me for many years. I just want to encourage all those of you to help keep Point of View on the air. We cannot afford to allow these stations to go empty. Please support Point of View.
You know, we just been talking about changing the world and making an influence in the culture, and many of you are doing that. But again, your support helps us educate you and empower you to make a difference. As we go to a break right now, let me encourage you to visit the website, pointofview.net, and click on that button that says Give Now. Or, of course, at any point, you can call the order line number, 800-347-5151, 800-347-5151, or pointofview.net. We'll be right back.
How many times have politicians promised to defund Planned Parenthood? Vote for us, we'll do it, and nothing happens. Well, the current administration finally did something, and though it was temporarily blocked, last Thursday a 3-judge panel of the Ninth Circuit recognized the president's power, and around $60 million of our money was removed from Planned Parenthood. It was a ray of sunshine in what's becoming an increasingly tough fight. And with your help, Point of View Radio will be here to continue the winning. But that's the key phrase, with your help. Our fiscal year ends this week, and to make plans for the second half of 2019 and the first part of the 2020 election year, we need your investment right now. Go to pointofview.net, click on the banner saying Morning in America, or call 800-347-5151. And your gift will be doubled if you give right now, thanks to a special matching grant. Pointofview.net, click on Morning in America, or invest by phone 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
We've spent some time talking about the presidential debate that takes place tonight and tomorrow night. And if you are not familiar, what we're talking about are, again, some things that will unfold at 9 o'clock Eastern, 8 o'clock Central, all the way to 6 o'clock on the Pacific Coast. And there will be these 10 candidates. I'll mention their names in just a minute. They'll have 60 seconds to answer questions, 30 seconds for a follow-up. And again, this will last for 2 hours. There'll be 5 segments divided by commercial breaks. And the hosts are Savannah Guthrie, Lester Holt, Chuck Todd, Rachel Maddow, and Jose Diaz-Balart. And those will be the people asking questions. And I'll mention who they are in just a minute, but I thought Jim Garrity did a good job idea of explaining what it's going to be like for some of these lesser-known candidates, sometimes referred to as the asterisks. He said for some of these presidential candidates tonight, it's as good as it's going to get. They'll step onto the stage, stand next to bigger names such as Elizabeth Warren and Beto O'Rourke. The audience will cheer, and for one brief shining moment, they will look and feel like serious candidates for the presidency of the United States. Then a short time later, reality will set in. They'll have to wait forever for a question. When the question arrives, it will be a different topic than they were hoping to get. They'll try to shoehorn in a prepared one-liner, and it will land with a thud instead of the laughter and applause they sought. They'll realize halfway through their answer denouncing the Trump administration that they sound almost indistinguishable from the preceding 2 speakers. And then, of course, by the second hour, they'll maybe try to have some of the pressure on and take a shot at Joe Biden, who won't even be on the stage. And that's kind of how it will play out. But again, if you're not familiar, we have Cory Booker, Julian Castro, Bill de Blasio, John Delaney, Tulsi Gabbard, Jay Inslee, Amy Klobuchar, Beto O'Rourke, Tim Ryan, and Elizabeth Warren. Now, imagine if you were to show these pictures to people outside, they might get Beto O'Rourke, Elizabeth Warren, might get Cory Booker. There will be some people that even if you're a policy geek might be going, I'm not sure who that is, or I think I've seen him before, but I can't tell you what he or she actually does or what position he or she holds. But to try to give us some perspective on that, we go to Lowell Ponte, who is the co-author with Craig Smith of the book Money, Morality, and the Machine, also the author of The Cooling, prophetic investigation of global climate change as well. Individual that, of course, has been writing a variety of different books, including things like The Future Looks Like Baltimore. He's been a legislative aide in the California Assembly. Of course, his articles have appeared in the New York Times, Washington Post, and the Wall Street Journal, Los Angeles Times. Talk show host for 17 different years on more than 300 radio stations, and joins us now by phone. So, Lowell, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Kirby, wonderful to be with you. Thanks for inviting me back. Yes, it's an amazing time. We've already seen all of these nobody candidates that even political junkies have scarcely heard of, engaged in what can only be called a free-for-all, which is to say they're offering everything for free that you can possibly think of. I mean, for the first time, the cork has come out of the bottle, and they're willing to promise. I think the average Democrat is now promising at least $100 trillion.
I know.
Worth of free goodies.
Let's talk about that, because you got Medicare for all. Of course, that's Bernie Sanders. Elizabeth Warren talking about a wealth tax. We're talking about reparations for the LGBT community. I didn't see that one coming. Pete Buttigieg wanting to pack the Supreme Court with more justices. Andrew Yang, universal basic income. Of course, guaranteed minimum wages and things that I don't think I would have ever expected people to actually promise. And even our friends at The Economist, the title of one of their articles, Democratic presidential candidates are making promises they cannot deliver. And I hope the American people are smart enough to say this is like promising a unicorn or a rainbow, right?
Oh, sure. And what they're faced with is the need to throw a successful Hail Marx, not Hail Mary, but a Hail Marx path that can be successful not only with people who donate money to them, but also with all these young Marxists. And Pete Buttigieg has found himself in an interesting position with the shooting and killing of an African American.
Yes.
In his own town now, he found himself marching with actual black masked members of Antifa, which in real propaganda terms wouldn't bother him, because after all, he is a far leftist. His father was a Marxist college professor. He was a classic red diaper baby. He himself was raised to be the perfect weapon, according to the techniques of Italian Marxist theorist Antonio Gramsci, the man who said, you don't destroy the United States by waging revolution outright. You destroy the United States by a march through the institutions, where you gradually just have leftists infiltrate and take over the universities, Hollywood, the news, and so on, until you can control the culture by what you put out, and then you just teach the young people to hate their own country, and voila, you've won.
Well, and one of the other things, while we're talking about people that have been sympathetic to communist ideas, Bernie Sanders, where he actually spent his honeymoon. And again, I've said to some of my listeners in the past, would you have predicted, say, 10 years ago that an individual would run as a socialist and actually not only win, of course, we've seen Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez win in the House of Representatives, Bernie Sanders winning out of Vermont, not as much a surprise there, but coming very close to winning the presidency. So in some respects, when you have individuals that have such a sort of leftist idea, the only way you get any kind of attention is either to try to out-left them, and I don't know there's a lot more room on the other side, or to try to be the so-called moderate candidate, which is what Joe Biden is going to try to look like tomorrow night, don't you think?
He'll try to look that way, but he'll also try to be acceptable to young leftists. Joe Biden's main problem is who will he pick for vice president if he's nominated? He'll have to pick someone, the assumption goes, who is well to the left of him in order to keep up the enthusiasm and support from a young leftist faction. But then you and I will look at Joe Biden and say, he's only one heartbeat away from having a heartbeat. No, one heartbeat away from being able to put a hard leftist in the presidency.
Well,
and
yeah,
do we really want to do that with a 78-year-old who that's the age he would be on the day he assumed the presidency? So that's pretty darn old.
Let's talk about that for just a minute. We haven't really brought up the age issue too much. It came out in 1984, and when we do our millennial roundtable, some of our millennials weren't around in 1984, but I remember when that was an issue with Ronald Reagan. It's starting to be a little bit of an issue with Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, Joseph Biden, and, of course, even with Donald Trump. Do you think that becomes an issue in the campaign? Certainly, it's becoming a little bit of an issue right now in the primary. What are your thoughts?
Well, even Bernie Sanders could have overcome that by being a socialist, except for one thing, he's now a millionaire. In fact, it's amazing how many of these old white people are millionaires who are running. Even a kid from Texas is worth about $9 million in his own right, and his father-in-law is worth $20 billion.
That's right.
So you wonder how he ever got any traction. And what's Beto O'Rourke now calling for? He's calling for tearing down not just Trump's future fence, but the fencing that already exists.
That's right.
A few feet of it. And he's now called for a war tax on pacifists, apparently. He says any non-military household should pay an additional supplemental tax because they didn't put their body on the line. Well, that's interesting. You mean pacifists and anti-war activists will now be taxed disproportionately because of their views? That's an interesting position for a leftist to take.
We need to take a break, but when I come back, I'd love to get your thoughts. I've tried to put together, as I've called it, the short list, and this really is the short list, but I only have about a minute before I get to the break here. But, of course, I mentioned Medicare for All, the Green New Deal, abortion, really now abortion rights till birth and even looks like maybe after, free college tuition, of course, we've been hearing that from a number of people, guaranteed basic income, a living wage of at least $15 an hour, a wealth tax, which we just mentioned a minute ago, government daycare, now the idea of forgiving all of the student loans, abolishing ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, then eliminate private health insurance. That came from your your senator out there, although I think Medicare for All would do the same thing, ending the Electoral College, lowering the voting age to 16, end the filibuster, pack the Supreme Court, heard a number of them say that, reparations for African Americans, reparations for LGBT, even the idea of legalizing illegal immigration. You're going to hear Julian
don't
Castro.
Forget Elizabeth Warren, the non-Native American, wants reparations for Native Americans.
Well, and that one too. So you got me laughing on that one. Let's take a break, but let's also open up the phones, give you a chance to join our conversation, because we're privileged to have with us a little bit longer Lowell Ponte, who is, of course, a talk show host himself. We have information about him on our website, pointofview.net. But what would you like to hear from some of these candidates tonight or tomorrow night. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. We'll talk a little bit more about this Democratic national debate tonight and tomorrow night, right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Well, Ponte on with us for a few more minutes as we talk about the Democrat debate tonight and tomorrow night. And again, I mentioned that some of the more notables tonight would be Beto O'Rourke, Elizabeth Warren, and Cory Booker. Some of the best-known individuals will be Thursday night, and that would be, of course, Joe Biden, Pete Buttigieg, as well as Kamala Harris and Bernie Sanders, and a number of others we could mention as well. And just before I take some phone calls, Lowell, what about this? It usually is the case that the economy is very significant in the election or the re-election of a president. The economy's doing pretty well. Now, Elizabeth Warren will say, well, only the rich are doing well. But a lot of listeners are going to say, and a lot of viewers are going to say, well, I'm doing pretty well, too. I mean, my median family income has gone up, and it's gone up for most people that are likely voters. So if you ignore the economy, and they may, and you focus instead on, I don't know, immigration or this tragic picture of this father and the 23-year-old daughter face down in the Rio Grande because they were drowned, maybe you can get some traction, but what are your thoughts?
Well, first, let's not forget, you're going to have the treat on one of these nights of having, for instance, Marianne Williamson. She is another slavery reparations advocate, but she is also a self-help guru and lecturer which is why you may never have heard of her. You're going to have former Colorado Governor John Hickenlooper, who, despite having a business background, refused to call himself a capitalist, which tells you how courageous they are. And to me, the most interesting single candidate is probably Andrew Yang, 44-year-old New York entrepreneur, author of the book The War on Normal People. I wonder what exactly that means. But what's intriguing is that he has not only called for universal basic income for everybody,
right? That's right,
which has the virtue of actually being liked by a lot of libertarians, because while you continue to pay welfare, as you are now, you could eliminate the welfare bureaucracy and just say, instead of paying for 1,200 social workers to look over you, we're just going to give you a check, and the social worker can now be unemployed. And that would save the bulk of the cost. Remember, the average welfare recipient only gets about, 12 cents or so out of every dollar spent by the government on welfare. All the rest goes to the bureaucracy or to the $100,000 a year political appointee activist in the activity and so on. So you would suddenly get rid of the biggest single dead weight in the welfare system by just giving people the money. It's actually cheaper. And Yang has said one other thing that I absolutely adore, apparently because he also would go along with getting rid of the Electoral College the way Buttigieg and others would. He has said that even in this campaign, he may talk to some states only by hologram because they're just too unimportant to visit the way they would be if there's no Electoral College.
Yeah, he's such a high-tech guy. Let me just get into that for a minute since you mentioned Marianne Williamson and Andrew Yang, because it brings me back to something else that you're familiar with in the state of California, and that's the whole immigration issue, because you have, I think I've counted up 10 candidates, Cory Booker, Pete Buttigieg, Julian Castro, Bernie Sanders, Liz Warren, and all sorts of them that say that really anybody that crosses the border or enters the country without permission should no longer have a crime, be considered a crime. And it's people like Andrew Yang and Marianne Williamson, just mentioned a minute ago, and Cory Booker and Bill de Blasio, Kirsten Gillibrand, that say we should no longer use E-Verify. And then even tonight, I'm sure we're going to hear Elizabeth Warren, Beto O'Rourke, and a few others that are saying maybe we should eliminate the citizenship exam and no longer require English proficiency. You live in California. I used to live in California. I remember when my dad ran for the California Assembly, but that was a very different world back in the 1960s. Talk about the issue of immigration and how that's affected your state and how these policies would affect the country.
Well, California is an odd state. It has 1/3 of all the welfare recipients in the nation. It has more than 1/4 of all the illegal immigrants in the country, if we dare still use that term. As of April a year ago, we implemented a new law in California where if you go down to get a driver's license or have something bureaucratically done that relates to driving, you will automatically be registered to vote, not as a citizen, but as a quote-unquote resident. So you have committed no crime by accepting the voting registration. Many states are now just doling out driver's licenses, which, since they're never questioned, become an automatic open sesame to voting. I remember when Arnold Schwarzenegger was governor here, he said he'd go along with giving driver's licenses to everybody, even though a Mexican could come here with a Mexican driver's license and drive. They have no reason to have a California driver's license. But he said the only condition is I want there to be some big identifiable mark on the face of the driver's license showing that the holder is not a citizen. And, oh, my goodness, the left just went berserk over that. How dare you ask such a thing?
Yeah.
Don't you understand the whole point of this was to give them de facto citizenship? So they're already allowed to vote. We already have vote harvesting as our major agricultural crop in the state of California now.
Yes, you do. And we have talked about that before.
Oh, by the way, my book with Craig Smith, who you see every week on Neil Cavuto on Fox Business, Money, Morality, and the Machine, we'll be happy to give you absolutely free. It has a whole chapter on what we call totally devoted, about the ways they have taken away your right to vote or diluted it to the point where it's meaningless. To get the free book, you can pay $20 to Amazon, or you can get it absolutely postpaid and at no cost at all by dialing 800-630-1492, like the year Columbus sailed the ocean blue. That's 630-1492. And by the way, in California, to show you how wonderful things are, our Senator Kamala Harris, age 54, junior senator, favors reparations for slavery, even though she herself is a half-black descendant of a Jamaican slave owner. She is all for legalizing marijuana, and she's all for legalizing prostitution. That doesn't get talked about much, but I think it's an interesting point for a feminist.
Well, again, you've got a lot of points, and I know you're going to be talking about it on our program, and we'll be talking about it tomorrow as well. So, Lowell, thank you for giving us some time here on Point of View.
Well, so thank you so much, Kirby. God bless. And the shows are going to be very entertaining, especially if Donald Trump is doing live commentary on Twitter and opposite, because he once ran a beauty contest, and this is definitely a beauty contest.
Well, let's take a break, and when we come back, we're going to spend some time taking some of your phone calls. So if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. But as we've pointed out before, we're coming to the end of our fiscal year. We have just 3 days left, and we need to hear from you.
To all listeners out there, I've been listening for over 2 years. I just recently became a supporter. So I'm a proud supporter of Point of View, and so I would just encourage everyone who listens to this radio station and to your specific broadcast, because it has been so influential for me, and I refer people to it because you put out such great information, and it's so thought-invoking and conversation-stimulating. It's great. So thank you so much, and I'll continue to support you guys.
But I've decided I'm going to give Point of View something this year because I think financially we're doing better. Point of View is one of, in my opinion, 2 or 3 places where you can really get this kind of information, and it is sorely lacking in our culture. And so Point of View, and there's a couple other programs, if we don't support them, I'm not convinced those messages will get out.
Thank you very much, and I just love your program. It's been an inspiration to me for many years. I just want to encourage all those of you and help keep Point of View on the air. We cannot afford to allow these stations to go empty. Please support Point of View.
Just before I go to break, let me just remind you, only 3 days left, and we're thankful for the few of you that have responded, but we need to hear from you. So as we go to a break, you can go to our website, pointofview.net. Again, don't forget that we certainly have a matching fund. And, of course, if you'd like to call someone off air, that's 800-347-5151.
How many times have politicians promised to defund Planned Parenthood? Vote for us, we'll do it, and nothing happens. Well, the current administration finally did something, and though it was temporarily blocked, last Thursday a 3-judge panel of the Ninth Circuit recognized the president's power, and around $60 million of our money was removed from Planned Parenthood. It was a ray of sunshine in what's becoming an increasingly tough fight. And with your help, Point of View Radio will be here to continue the winning. But that's the key phrase, with your help. Our fiscal year ends this week, and to make plans for the second half of 2019 and the first part of the 2020 election year, we need your investment right now. Go to pointofview.net, click on the banner saying Morning in America, or call 800-347-5151. And your gift will be doubled if you give right now, thanks to a special matching grant. Pointofview.net, click on Morning in America, or invest by phone, 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week. in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Have a couple of calls from last hour. And again, Lowell was very significant in terms of what he wanted to say, and so I just thought I'd just let him finish his comments. So I've heard his point of view, but I want to hear your point of view. We do have a debate tonight and tomorrow night. Also, in just a few minutes, want to talk about the decision to have Robert Mueller testify in front of Congress, and also a piece that I've posted here about Congress and the constitutional order. But let's take some phone calls. Love to get your thoughts about the debates tonight. So we'll head first to the state of Illinois. John, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Yes, thank you. I'm here calling that Jamie Foxx is a cunt.
Well, I'm just afraid that was not something we wanted to hear. So if you would like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Let's go to California. Adam, thank you for joining us today.
Hello, good morning, and I apologize for the gentleman before me. I just wanted to hear the debate talk about our president, Donald Trump, how influential his cabinet is because of the people he surrounded himself with since day one. And the reason they won't talk about it is because of how much Christian influence he's actually exposing himself to. So I want to hear the debate of how they like it or dislike it, but I guarantee they won't even bring up that subject.
You know, and that is a good point, because I have said before that when you're evaluating a candidate who is an executive, and so that would be like the mayor, that would be the governor, or in this case, it would be the president, I want to know as much not only what you believe, but who you would surround yourself with, because it is, I think, fairly obvious, but sometimes it eludes some of the individuals that are voting for a candidate, that one individual, I don't care if it's the governor, I don't care if it's the president, can only do so much. And policy is enacted by personnel. That's why we oftentimes use the phrase, personnel is policy. And so when you see that Donald Trump made it very clear early on the kind of people he probably would put in his cabinet, you had a pretty good idea that he was going to put Ben Carson in the cabinet. Nobody was surprised by that. And Rick Perry is in the cabinet, and I don't think anybody was terribly surprised by that. There were a couple of surprises there. And then when he gave us a list of who he would actually appoint to the Supreme Court, and he's kept to that list, and then others that aren't on that list are those that have been put in because they've been vetted by the Federalist Society or the Heritage Foundation, I think those are very significant issues. And then back to the key point that you made, Adam, we have just an enormous number of individuals that serve in this cabinet of Donald Trump that are Christians. A lot of people still say, I don't know whether Donald Trump's a Christian or not. I'll leave that for a debate on another day. But you do have that Christian influence, and I will say that you'll hear a few of these candidates maybe allude to the fact that they're religious, or Marianne Williamson will say I'm spiritual, but they're not going to really claim that they're Christians, because that is going to be a deal breaker for any of the very motivated primary voters on the Democrat Party. Not that there aren't Christians in the Democratic Party, don't misunderstand, but those who are the most motivated tend to be more secular, more progressive. That's just the nature of the primary event. And so I think you've really asked a very good question. I don't think anybody that's a moderator is going to ask that question, but I think it was a very good one. So I appreciate you bringing it today.
Yeah, and I thank you for your time.
Well, appreciate you calling in. He was alluding to the fact that every once in a while we have somebody trying to call in and say something naughty, but we just, again, cover that up so that you don't have a chance to hear it. Just real quickly, let me mention a couple of points, and that is that, by the way, if you'd like to join us, that opens up a line, 1-800-351-1212. The difficulty for a lot of these candidates that aren't well known is they have 60 seconds to make a point. Some of them may be better at that than others. But 60 seconds to answer a question, then sometimes 30 seconds for a follow-up. They don't get a chance to even make an opening statement. So as I shared just a few minutes ago from that piece by Jim Garrity, which I thought was really well done, these are individuals that are just going to be waiting and waiting and waiting to be able to finally say something when they do get a question, and that question might come from Savannah Guthrie or Lester Holt or Chuck Todd or Rachel Maddow or somebody like that. It may not be the question they really wanted to answer, and they're going to try to figure out a way, if they can, to fit in their one-liner, and that's going to be kind of a big issue of how to do that. And then even as they give their answer, they're going to be thinking to themselves, I sound like the other 9 on the stage here. And so the breakout sometimes comes with a witty one-liner or just an innate, some kind of innovative kind of answer that somebody didn't see coming. I still wonder, is there a possibility tonight that, given the fact that, yes, we have, as we pointed out just a few minutes ago, some individuals that are obviously very leftist or liberal, or even kind of Marxist, could you stand out at all by not being that way? You know, Tulsi Gabbard on a number of issues certainly wouldn't be quite as liberal on and leftist as some of the other people on that stage. You have Jay Inslee, perhaps, in that category. Tim Ryan, maybe. Or do they just simply hold the line and make those kinds of statements that they would make? And, of course, this is going to be an issue that will be frustrating for some of them, because some of their, if you will, most important issues for their red meat listeners and viewers are ones where everybody's in agreement. Is there anybody on the stage tonight that isn't pro-choice? No, I can't find any. So asking a question about abortion, maybe Rachel Maddow will ask one of those questions, isn't going to really separate you out from anyone else unless you find a different way to answer that question. If you want to make a point about the economy, you can maybe talk about income inequality, but you certainly can't say that the Trump economy has been a disaster when you recognize that for most Americans, the median family income has increased, and it has actually increased especially for what? The most likely voters. Yes, there are still people in poverty. They tend to be less likely to vote, so maybe they're frustrated by the economy, but there's not as much you can say about the economy. Climate change. Is there anybody up there that believes that we don't have climate change? No. So, again, that one doesn't really help you break out from the pack. So it's going to be interesting to see the kind of questions that are going to come from a Lester Holt, a Rachel Maddow, a Chuck Todd, or whoever it might be. So nevertheless, just wanted to get you thinking about this particular set of debate participants tonight. And then, of course, we have another set of debates tomorrow night. And I have no indication at this point how many people will be watching, but I suspect that because of all the controversy surrounding some of this, NBC and MSNBC might do pretty well tonight. So we will see. And we will spend some time tomorrow talking about that. But if you have any other comments about this upcoming presidential debate for the Democratic candidates, love to hear from you. 1-800-351-1212. Also, I want to move on to a couple of other issues. Robert Mueller is going to be testifying. What's that going to mean? Have that to cover, and we will, right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Dennis Prager asks parents an important question. He wants to know, did your child return from college a better person? I think many of us sadly know the answer to that haunting question. When I first joined Probe Ministries, they had a brochure with the title, Will Your Children Lose Their Faith in College? His question attempts to dig even deeper into the current college environment. For example, he looks at the percentage of college students who are drinking on campus. One website states that roughly 80% of college students, 4 out of 5, consume alcohol to some degree. It's estimated that 50% of those students engage in binge drinking. Another example would be sexual promiscuity on campus. Dennis Prager observes, we're all aware of the sexual activity that emanates from college drinking and can be regretted the next day, usually by women. And I might add that the latest estimates are that 1 in 4 college students will contract an STD during their time in school. A third concern is depression and mental illness. One writer in Psychology Today concludes that it is neither an exaggeration nor is it alarmist to claim that there is a mental health crisis facing America's college students. Evidence suggests that this group has greater levels of stress and psychopathology than any other time in the nation's history. So that is why parents need to understand the dangers and begin to evaluate where their children attend college. They need to stop and realize that they might be sending their kids off to a school that will increase their chances of depression, increase their likelihood of binge drinking, and return home with a head full of secular, progressive ideas about marriage, family, and society. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Socialism, go to viewpoints.info/socialism. That's viewpoints.info/socialism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, let me in just a minute talk about the testimony that will take place in July by Robert Mueller. But just before we do so, I thought I'd just pass on one tip for those of you that may be watching the debate tonight or tomorrow night, and that is whether you agree with what is being said or not. It brings us back to a piece that we did post yesterday. It comes from The Economist, and this one actually came out earlier in the month, so it gives a kind of a short list of some of the things that are being proposed by the Democrats. But even though The Economist probably is very sympathetic to some of these candidates, the title of the article is Democratic Candidates Are Making Promises They Cannot Deliver. And they go through the short list of all the things that are being promised. Bernie Sanders, of course, from Vermont, basically promoting Medicare for all. Elizabeth Warren from Massachusetts, wanting to impose a wealth tax on the rich, calling for universal child care, as well as Pete Buttigieg, or Mayor Pete from South Bend, wanting to pack the Supreme Court with 6 more justices. Or, we just mentioned a minute ago, Andrew Yang calling for universal basic income. And then you have the reality that should hit very quickly as these individuals, who are probably very sympathetic to some of these Democratic candidates, that say that even if President Donald Trump lost, the Democrats would have to actually deal with the Senate. And their argument is, even out of 100 senators, 47 are reliable Democrats, and that's assuming that those that will be running next year will actually win re-election, and that's up for some debate. But okay, let's just concede 47. They point out that to win back control of the chamber, the Democratic Party would need to pick up a minimum of 3 seats and also win the presidency, since the vice president could break ties. And so then they point out that then you would still have problems with the Senate because you have the filibuster. And so you do have people like Elizabeth Warren that have talked about eliminating the filibuster, and I mentioned that just a few minutes ago in my short list. But then you have others that are senators that are going, well, I don't think so. For example, Cory Booker, Kirsten Gillibrand, who will be on tomorrow night, Kamala Harris will be on tomorrow night. They're a little more skittish about that. And they might go along because, after all, Cory Booker wants to implement very significant gun control policies. And Kirsten Gillibrand is not on board for filibuster, but might go along because she wants paid family leave and wants to promote all sorts of additional abortion rights and things of that nature. You have, of course, we just mentioned a minute ago some of the things that Senator Kamala Harris, in terms of legalization of marijuana and other things, might go along. But still, there are some questions that I think the viewers should be asking. And I would certainly hope that some of the interviewers and some of the hosts, Savannah Guthrie, Lester Holt, Chuck Todd, Rachel Maddow, some of these would at least ask, what do you think is the likely possibility that your particular issue you're talking about would even be passing the Senate, unless you also have Democrats take control of the Senate and also keep control of the House? Both big questions, by the way. So that's something to be thinking about as you're listening to all the promises that will be made tonight and tomorrow night. They're making promises they cannot deliver. That's not my opinion. That comes from the editors of The Economist. Let's get into another issue. The chairman of the House Judiciary Committee says that he expects then Robert Mueller to actually testify. This will take place on July 17th. And again, we've already heard from Robert Mueller saying he's not going to provide any new information. So again, 4 months after the special counsel Robert Mueller has issued his report, 3 months after his report was released to the public, and we've seen some of the analysis that was provided, for example, by the Attorney General, William Barr, he'll be testifying in front of both the House Judiciary Committee and the Intelligence Committee. He's already said everything I would say has been written in that document. He did do another press conference. And, of course, you are obligated to answer some questions. And that's where I think there's going to be kind of an interesting set of circumstances, because although you feel like the Democrats see this as a great opportunity to try to get him to say that, well, even though we didn't find collusion, it may have taken place. Maybe you're looking for him to say that even though we did not see obstruction of justice, that was simply because you cannot charge a sitting president with it. I doubt he's going to say any of that. But if he does, then you can see that maybe there would be some benefit to some of the Democrats on the committee and even give them a justification for impeachment hearings. But this particular issue actually swings both ways, because now the Republicans on the House Judiciary Committee and Intelligence Committee can, for the first time, really bring up some of those questions about the dossier, about the various ways in which Hillary Clinton should have been investigated, in terms of how this collusion investigation was begun in the first place, and dig into some of the things that did not end up on the 448-page report. So right now, what you see is the possibility that it would indeed be something that could benefit the Democrats. It just as easily could go the other direction. And Robert Mueller said when he spoke on May 29th, we chose those words carefully, and the work speaks for itself. I would not provide information beyond what is already public in any appearance before Congress. So that's what he stated. But again, there are going to be attempts both by Democrats on the committee and Republicans on both these committees to ask some other questions. And so in some respects, it may not go any further. But let me again quote from a few people that are convinced that this was a really good idea. Let's go to the Judiciary Committee chairman, that's Gerald Nadler, who said, I think that given the nature of what he has to say, given the nature of what was in the report, he would be a very compelling witness. Maybe, we'll see. If he decides to simply reiterate everything he said, they're not going to get very far with that. And then the House Intelligence Committee Chairman Adam Schiff says, when you accept the role of special counsel in one of the most important, significant investigations in modern history, you're going to have to expect what you're going to be asked to come and testify before Congress. The two hearings, in case you're curious, will be held back-to-back, one for each committee. They'll also meet with the staff that worked with Robert Mueller in a closed session afterwards, and the Judiciary panel will go first. The Intelligence panel will go after that, and so we'll see what happens in terms of the negotiations. But if nothing else, you knew the president was going to say something, and President Donald Trump tweeted presidential harassment, and then when he was doing an interview the other day, said it never ends. So anyway, something else that has surfaced, and that is the decision on July 17th to actually hear from Robert Mueller, and I thought I might mention that as well. Just before we go to a break, let's again recognize that many of our listeners are encouraging you to support Point of View.
Oh, I thank God for what you're doing on Point of View. You guys have more influence across this country than I believe any of them in terms of tackling the issues and getting the truth out to Americans. It's getting to the point where truth just is bottled up on every hand. Every time you turn around, there's another big bottleneck against truth. I hope your listeners realize what Point of View is doing and supports Point of View in every possible way you can.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
I always wanted to give because I thought that Point of View really brings a lot of things out here in the open that you don't hear anywhere else. And I knew when I was hearing on there, well, I could count on it being something that you could check into it, and the proof would be there. You know, I didn't have to wonder, well, where did they make that stuff up from? I just know that it's going to be facts. That's what I call true journalism and putting the stuff out. I really think that's great.
That's what we call the Truth Team. We encourage some of you to even join with the team for $1 a day, $30 a month. You can join with us. But again, whether you join with us for a monthly gift or just a one-time gift, we certainly appreciate those of you that have responded. But again, we're down to 2 days plus a little bit left today before we are ending our fiscal year, so we do need to hear from you. You can go to the website pointofview.net and click on that button that says Give Now. And let me just also mention, as we go to a break right now, it'd be a good time to even call our order line number, 800-347-5151. Got a couple of other issues to point out. Justice Neil Gorsuch is actually beginning to change what's happening in the Supreme Court. We'll talk about that right after this.
How many times have politicians promised to defund Planned Parenthood? Vote for us, we'll do it, and nothing happens. Well, the current administration finally did something, and though it was temporarily blocked, last Thursday a 3-judge panel of the Ninth Circuit recognized the president's power, and around $60 million of our money was removed from Planned Parenthood. It was a ray of sunshine in what's becoming an increasingly tough fight. And with your help, Point of View Radio will be here to continue the winning. But that's the key phrase, with your help. Our fiscal year ends this week, and to make plans for the second half of 2019 and the first part of the 2020 election year, we need your investment right now. Go to pointofview.net, click on the banner saying Morning in America, or call 800-347-5151. And your gift will be doubled if you give right now, thanks to a special matching grant. Pointofview.net, click on Morning in America, or invest by phone, 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Yesterday, we, of course, talked about Iran. That may show up in the debate tonight. We'll see how that plays out. We may do another program on that in the future, especially as tensions increase there in the Middle East. But for the moment, I wanted to go back to the Supreme Court because there are some very interesting decisions that are coming down. And, of course, you have already heard us talk about earlier in the week the decisions related to religious liberty. And we even talked about a few of the others, a couple more that we will get to before the end of the week, because Supreme Court oftentimes leaves the most controversial decisions to the end. But there was that almost went unnoticed, and yet it's something that Kelly Shackelford and I oftentimes talk about off the air, but we really haven't done too much talking about it on the air. So when I saw yesterday that David French had written about it, I said, okay. I even sent the article to Kelly just to make sure, since he's the lawyer and our expert, if he thought it was a good idea, and he certainly did as well. And so you can find it on our website. It's referred to as Congress and the Congressional Order. David French titled his Justice Gorsuch Wages War for the Constitutional Order. And what we're talking about here is something that has been kind of notable by the justice, and that is his willingness sometimes to tell Congress, it's not our job in the federal judiciary to solve your problems or to fix your problems. It's your job to do it, and I'm not going to do it for you any longer. But he starts out, David French starts out by saying, if you had to list the top 5 reasons for the politicization and political polarization, and maybe even for the collapse of American confidence in the American government right now, he said, where would you start? He gives us some examples, whether it's the Iraq War, the recession, or policies on trade, healthcare, whatever. But then in his second paragraph says, I would like to suggest one other. He says, Congress, the branch of government closest to the people, has slowly but surely abdicated its role in American constitutional government, even as the power of the federal government grew. The American people are increasingly divorced, he says, from an increasingly powerful national government. And he says, here's the plain truth. If you live in a safe red or blue state, you may never in your entire life cast a single meaningful vote to influence the 2 most powerful instruments of modern governance, which are the presidency and the judiciary. You're left with casting votes for the unintentionally weakest branch, a legislature that seems to want to do anything but its job, the job that the founders gave it. Sometimes I have a chance to interview members of Congress. Earlier today on our local hour, I interviewed Representative Van Taylor. Tomorrow I'm going to be interviewing Representative Louis Gohmert. And to a person, they're saying that Congress is just simply not doing their job. And it's been kind of something that Neil Gorsuch has started to take on, because he's starting to lose his patience with members of Congress writing, for example, what we call message bills. These are ones that are poorly written. They're sent over to the Senate. They don't even expect the Senate to consider them. They're just there to kind of make a statement, but they're not carefully crafted. Or in some cases, even if they are supposedly carefully crafted, they delegate all of the decision-making either to the bureaucracy or to the judiciary. A classic illustration of that would be the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare. If you ever took the time to read through that particular monstrosity, and I do mean that in terms of the number of pages, and I have not read all of it. Louis Gohmert, interesting enough, will be in the program with us tomorrow, actually sat down and read it all. But even as I read through parts of it, I was struck by the number of times there was a phrase, as the Secretary of Health and Human Services shall determine. In other words, we're not going to figure it out. We're not even going to try to answer the question. We'll just leave it to the Secretary of HHS to make those decisions. And that was Kathleen Sebelius back then. And they did. And so that's where all the abortion things showed up. And, of course, that's where then you had Hobby Lobby saying, wait a minute, we're not going to do this. And they had to go all the way to the Supreme Court to remedy that particular issue. So either they delegate it to the executive branch, ultimately to bureaucrats, unnamed sometimes bureaucrats that are, you don't even know who they are because they work for a cabinet officer that was appointed by the president, or else they delegate it to the judiciary to go and fix a problem. So nevertheless, this is a particular case that yesterday Justice Neil Gorsuch actually was critical. Matter of fact, more than critical, he was actually just a little bit frustrated with the Congress about being lazy and ineffectual, because he said, in our constitutional order, a vague law is not a law at all. And so he wrote this with a 5-justice majority. The other 4 were liberals. This is one of the reasons why I think it's probably good that the framers never had justices actually have to stand for re-election, because you could see that some people might say, well, Justice Gorsuch is light on crime since this had to do with a criminal justice statute. No, it's not like he's light on crime. He's just hard on Congress. And what he said was there's a federal statute that threatens long prison sentences on individuals who use firearms in committing crimes, and went out to point out that this particular piece of legislation, he says, quote, provides no reliable way to determine which offenses qualify as crimes of violence. So the concern that he had was, you don't even in the bill define what this is, so you leave it intentionally vague. And by leaving it vague, you're expecting either a federal judge or, in this case, a Supreme Court justice to clarify what it is. And his argument is, we're going to have none of it. You need to go back and rewrite the law. That was certainly, I think, really significant. And I think it's also helpful to see that this is not the first time. There was another case, and this one had to do with whether or not the Sex Offender Registration Notification Act could actually be completely adjudicated by the Attorney General. And in this particular case, he lost, but in writing the dissenting opinion, pointed out again that Congress is not doing its job. Let me read from that, if I might. He says the Constitution promises that only people's elected representatives may adopt new federal laws restricting liberty. Yet the statute before us scrambles that design. It purports to endow the nation's chief prosecutor with the power to write his own criminal code governing the lives of 500,000 citizens. Yes, those affected are some of the least popular among us, but if a single executive branch official can write laws restricting the liberty of this group of persons, what does that mean for the next? So again, 3 cheers for Justice Neil Gorsuch, who is first of all, impatient with Congress not doing its job, and impatient with the fact that sometimes it's unelected officials and bureaucrats that are affecting our lives. And we've talked about that so often on our program here at Point of View. Let me just mention real quickly before we take a break that my commentary today is entitled The College Environment, and it is there because I have been so concerned about the fact that when our kids go off to college, they lose their faith. And so one of the reasons that we do a pro mind games conference every year, which just happened last week, one of the reasons that you have all sorts of wonderful ministries like Summit Ministries that do this is to really prepare them for the intellectual challenge that they're going to face and the spiritual challenge they're going to face. But Dennis Prager adds a third issue. In addition to the spiritual challenge and the intellectual challenge is the social challenge. He points out, for example, that when you look at college students, drinking on campus has gone through the roof. For example, one website claims that roughly 80% of college students, that's 4 out of 5, consume alcohol to some degree. It's estimated that 50% of those students engage in binge drinking. He talks about sexual promiscuity on the campus, and I even add something he doesn't mention in his commentary about the fact that through college, 1 in 4 college students contract an STD. And then this whole issue of depression and mental illness. One writer in Psychology Today concludes that it is neither an exaggeration nor is it alarmist to claim that there is a mental health crisis facing America's college students. Evidence suggests that this group has greater levels of stress and psychopathology than any time in the nation's history. And so I'm pointing out that those of you that are parents need to pay attention to where your kids are going, because you might send your kids off to a school that increases their chance of depression, increasing their likelihood of binge drinking, and that they may return home with a head full of secular progressive ideas about marriage, family, and society. Speaking of college, I'm going to talk about college loans in just a minute. That's another issue that Bernie Sanders has put on the table, so we'll talk about that. But if you'd like to join our conversation at any point, 1-800-351-1212. Some of these articles are on the website, and as you go there, I hope you'll click on the button that says Give Now. We'll be right back.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes, and as we come to the end of the program, I thought we might just bring in the president of Point of View, Warren Kelly, to kind of tell us how we're doing. And as I mentioned, you know, we're down to 3 days, and actually tomorrow it'll be Thursday and Friday, and that's the end of our fiscal year. A lot of people, I think, Warren, don't realize that we don't hear from a lot of individuals. A while ago, we played a clip where one of our callers had mentioned, yes, we only get a response from about 1%. I'm not even sure it's 1% these days.
Yeah, we're running a little short of that.
Yeah, so how are we doing in terms of the fiscal year and the match that we have here as well?
We're doing good, but, well, we're running a little slow.
Yes.
We've still got a fairly big hill to climb before the end of the week. So we're down to 2.5 days and still have right at $100,000 that we still need to come in that time.
Yes. And again, this is just to get us to where we were last year. It doesn't even really meet our budget, does it?
Yeah, budget, we're about $130,000 that we're short still. So we could really use your help. Very thankful for the few people that have responded, and there's about 900 of them, so that's good. But there's, let me see, we have 1.4 million listeners, and we had 900. Let me do the math. Carry the one. Yeah, I think we have a few more that still need to respond. It would be good if you could help us. You're the one that really makes this happen. As you've probably heard Kerby say before, if it weren't for you, the people who give, nobody outside the studio would ever hear his voice, would never hear the guest, all the great information. So you're the ones that are influencing the culture by the gifts that you send that carry the broadcast out across the nation.
And we talked with Hunter Baker about making a difference in the culture and changing the culture, and certainly we've seen some really positive things, which is why the theme is Morning in America.
Yes.
But at the same time, just today, as we talked about the anniversary of Obergefell, which is the same-sex marriage decision, we certainly recognize that there are a lot of other challenges facing us. So you can help educate the next generation, and we really want to equip you to make a difference in the community. So if nothing else, this is one of the reasons why we really challenge people to support Point of View.
We definitely need your help. The only source of revenue we really have is that comes from you, the listeners. So we need to hear from you. If you haven't given yet this year, we really do need to hear from you. It would be great if we could see the phones light up, or you still got time to put a check in the mail. If you can get it postmarked by Friday, that would still count for this fiscal year and toward our match. So please let us hear from you.
Well, if nothing else, we want to encourage you to respond, and I just wanted to bring Warren Kelly in for a few minutes to talk about that. Let me just mention that one of the other articles that I thought would be helpful to you is you're going to be hearing Bernie Sanders tomorrow night talking about this idea of wiping out all student debt. And I thought it was appropriate that Ben Shapiro, who's been on the program before, said, it is interesting because the way Bernie Sanders has argued for that is, quote, are you truly free if you graduate with hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt? Are you free if you cannot pursue your dream because you don't make enough to cover your student loan payments? We will hashtag cancel student debt because there is no freedom without economic freedom. And I love what Ben Shapiro says. This is an Orwellian redefinition of the term freedom. And if nothing else, a good example of the fact that you're going to be hearing all sorts of ideas about freedom tonight and tomorrow night. But again, you need to exercise some level of discernment. If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Eric in Texas, what would you like to add to our conversation today?
Well, I've been listening to you for about 35 years, or your former one, but my admonition or just request for Christians to pray for these speakers tonight and tomorrow night. Scripture admonishes us to pray for all people, and especially sometimes those that don't quite agree with us, right, or our enemies.
That's a good idea, to watch, to listen, and to pray. I think those are things
Amen.
that we need to do, and we'll do some analysis of some of that tomorrow. So, Eric, I appreciate that.
And just
go ahead.
Having the right motives, and ask the Lord to bless them.
Well, it sounds like you've been a listener for some time, and in just a minute, I certainly wanted to mention that as well. But I just thought it was interesting that Ben Shapiro was talking about the fact that freedom has traditionally meant your decision and your ability to make decisions and live with the consequences of those decisions. He said, if I go out there and buy a real fancy car on credit, if Visa will extend me that credit, I'm not deprived of freedom when Visa then asks me to pay for the bill. And so that is just something to think about in light of the conversations that will be taking place tonight and tomorrow night. And let me just mention that we are privileged to have Penna Dexter join us a little bit tomorrow to give some analysis of that. And on our Friday weekend edition, we'll have Dr. Merrill Matthews and Colonel Alan West. I'm sure he's going to have a few comments about that as well. But just before we go to a break, one of the things we like to do is hear from some of our listeners. We just heard from Eric a minute ago about praying for those with whom we might disagree. But what do our listeners say about the importance of point of view?
You know, I can't go to Washington. I can't do those things. So the only way that I can help is the way that God has provided for me, and to give some of that back to you guys. So, like you said, partnering with Point of View, because, you know, you can't do it alone. Thank you very much for what you guys do. Believe me, it's a needed thing, and I just hope everybody certainly would get on the bandwagon with you.
I can't afford not to support you. Point of View gives me a voice, and I just appreciate you. And I've been here listening for years, so I thank you, and I do. Again, I said I can't afford not to support you because I want you to keep going.
I'm 25 years old, and I started listening to Point of View about 4 years ago, and it has changed the way that I think and the way that I view the world around me.
My husband and I are your supporters. We just really appreciate the show and the people you bring on.
You know, one of the things we just heard someone say is, I can't go to Washington, but you know what? A lot of you have gone to Washington. Even some of the people in Washington, like Michelle Bachmann, listen to this program, have gone to Washington. Louis Gohmert's going to be with us tomorrow, and he's certainly been influenced by this program. We've had others that have gone to Washington, like Kelly Shackelford, who actually last Thursday was sitting in the Supreme Court wondering whether or not the decision would come down. They did the first one, they did the second one. All of a sudden they said 717 is going, wait a minute, that's ours. Oh my goodness, we're going to have to find out what the decision is. They read some of that. He's then reading the material as he's walking out of the Supreme Court. He sees the microphones. He tries to figure out what he's going to say about that goes. And he's one of those individuals that is your eyes and ears in Washington, D.C. And earlier in the week, of course, we had Gary Bauer. So if nothing else, Warren Kelly, we are many times equipping people who go to Washington, D.C., and even if we can't go to Washington, D.C., we can, by supporting this organization, equip those that are making a difference.
Right, and a lot of those people out there making a difference are doing it because of the influence of Point of View. You mentioned Kelly. Kelly listened to Point of View when he was a law student, and it played a very key role in his decision to devote his career to that. We were one of the founding members for ADF, the Alliance for Defending Freedom. We've done a tremendous amount to support many others as well in that field, so that we're making a difference, but we can't do it without you because you are the one that makes it possible.
So one more time, let me just mention that again, we have a very significant challenge, and as you heard Warren mention just a minute ago, almost $100,000 that has to come in today and the next 2 days. So I, first of all, would encourage you to go to our website, pointofview.net, and at any time you can click on that button that says Give Now, but do it now while you're thinking about it. But also, even though we're going off the air, we still will take phone calls at our order line number. That's 800-347-5151. I've already heard from some of you that actually have shared some wonderful stories with those who have actually been able to answer the phone. So again, you can call us at 800-347-5151. or go to the website, pointofview.net. I want to thank Andrew and Steve for the help behind the scenes. We'll see you back here tomorrow on Point of View.
How many times have politicians promised to defund Planned Parenthood? Vote for us, we'll do it, and nothing happens. Well, the current administration finally did something, and though it was temporarily blocked, last Thursday a 3-judge panel of the Ninth Circuit recognized the president's power, and around $60 million of our money was removed from Planned Parenthood. It was a ray of sunshine in what's becoming an increasingly tough fight. And with your help, Point of View Radio will be here to continue the winning. But that's the key phrase, with your help. Our fiscal year ends this week, and to make plans for the second half of 2019 and the first part of the 2020 election year, we need your investment right now. Go to pointofview.net, click on the banner saying Morning in America, or call 800-347-5151. And your gift will be doubled if you give right now, thanks to a special matching grant. Pointofview.net, click on Morning in America, or invest by phone, 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.